You don't get
It's
the
a
feeling
payoff
of success without a little bit of tension beforehand.
for sure.
Like that, if you're like, if there's a food analogy, if you get sugar every day, sugar's not going to be special. But if you're on vegetables every day and you know sugar's coming, like that sugar is going to be so much more valuable. And so same thing with, success or treats or career progress or whatever. If we're used to getting promoted every year, oh, you got a promotion again. I mean, great. But like, I didn't have to fight for it. But like, if you don't struggle, like, what have you learned?
Hello and welcome to Salesforce Trails and Trials, where two Salesforce architects and special guests share their wins and woes so that you can learn with us.
All right, Eric, welcome. It's been a minute, and I'm
Hey
so good to
there.
be back with another episode here of Salesforce Trails and Trials. So what's been going on lately?
Lately, so much. I mean, we've all been dealing with not just inside my job, but the whole industry is trying to deal with AI and what's important and what's not. And so just it feels like we're learning, finding new podcasts. This Week in OpenAI is one I listen to a lot. It's super deep, super nerdy, but it's just incredible how much everything is happening. And how do we make it work for our personal lives and for our work lives? So, lots of learning. Soon enough, we're going to make sense of it and
Yeah,
do
lots of
something cool
learning.
with it.
Well, I also, I feel like Mark Benioff gave us all a gift by making the AI certs free for the fourth quarter. And so I took advantage of a couple of those and I found it to be, yeah, very, very unique, insightful. I'm sure we'll get into it in future episodes. There's a lot
Yeah,
of people first dimensions in
great.
how to figure out business value, how to come up with those use cases, and how to walk people through kind of a non-determinative kind of model that they're really not used to on
Yeah.
Salesforce. So a really big paradigm shift, and it's cool to be in kind of at least the early stages of the Salesforce world. And maybe I'll look at that podcast that you're talking about for the wider world. So let's talk a little bit about kind of our core topic for today. I think for me, when we think about our people first minute today, one thing I did is I went back and, as you know, I've been thinking a lot about project failure and what we can do about helping project failure. I actually found a lot of information. Salesforce Ben is actually coming out shortly with a whole article on essentially, the underbelly, the undesirable side of the professional services world as it relates to Salesforce. And there are estimates, some of them confirm or show that up to 95% of these projects fail for non-technical reasons. And so one of these aspects we found was this group called Foxmeyer Drug. And what's interesting is I think you actually had some knowledge of this use case back in the day, right?
Well, you were and I were reviewing it, and to just go back 30 seconds, there's problems on Salesforce projects, SAP projects, tons of
Yes,
projects.
correct.
And I've seen both sides. I was a consultant and I didn't experience any huge failures, but I've seen it's complicated. It's the project is beyond an SOW. There's more that people should be asking for to make sure that a project is successful, or the SOW needs to include it. This project you're talking about, Foxmeyer Drug, I think it's from like early 2000, late
Late
90s.
90s, exactly.
And you were telling me it was about an SAP implementation that didn't go right, and Accenture was the consulting firm. And maybe what happened was, there wasn't enough change management, I think, built into the project. And so I came on to Accenture right after this, and I worked there for 6 years. And so I started as a programmer, technical lead, and then, well, basically ended as a technical lead after 6 years on a bunch of different projects. And my comment was, I've seen things like change management be cut from SOWs in order to make budget,
Mm.
what the customer could afford. I find it hard to believe that Accenture would
Yeah, so
not
this was
try to include
Anderson
that.
Consulting.
Oh, yes, it was Anderson
Yes.
Consulting.
Yes. But
Thanks for
you're
the
right in
correction.
this failure is really taking into account technical projects across all industries, not just Salesforce, but Salesforce is within that technical project industry. So it
Yeah.
suffers from many of the same risks.
It does. It does. We have, with any Salesforce project, you need to think about not just rolling it out, but training the users afterwards. I mean, it doesn't even matter that you built it and it works. People don't know where to start or how it differs, how the new process differs from the old process. It's part of the rollout. It doesn't just, it'll do it if you use it and it was configured to do it, but we need to make sure people know how to use it.
It's a great point, and this is the challenge of that flexibility I always think of Legos, right? That Legos are so flexible. You can configure them in any way you like, and you can make something that is amazing, like we've seen, see, like all the Lego movies, for example, right? I think
Right.
about at the end of the movie, and they actually show the real life, and it's like, wow, look at that whole cityscape, or anybody who's been to the Lego Museum. But you can also produce something that is totally fragile, ugly, unrecognizable, and just creates, much to my wife's agreement, creates a bunch of things that people step on all the time. And I
Yeah.
can't stand having all of these small parts everywhere.
Yeah.
So it's kind of both the boom and the bane of Salesforce, and it really puts the onus back on the people. And one example, and we go into this further on a Tales from the Fails episode where we really analyze Foxmeyer drugs in more detail. But one aspect in particular I thought was amazing with this. They had software that was going to go in. You mentioned ERP. They also had a warehouse management tool that was going to
Mm.
integrate with this product. And if you think about a warehouse, the people who are most likely to have a really good clue and insight into what we need for our everyday operations are the people who are actually like rolling the forklifts, dealing with the pallets, doing the inventory, all of this inside the floor of the warehouse. And this particular project didn't have any of those people as key stakeholders
Mm.
in the project to actually ask for what are the things that you feel are really going to work. And even if we can't deliver everything to you, at least you're participating, taking ownership, and getting some vested interest in the success of this project with your peers. I was very
Yeah.
surprised to see that.
It sounds familiar though. Have you ever heard of a Salesforce project that was what happens, I think, is the sales process and the analytics required by the sales leadership is what then defines the user interface for the sales users. And the consultants build what they're told to build, but then adoption might fail because maybe there wasn't a stakeholder who was somebody representing the interests of the salespeople. And their view on Salesforce is, or any sales tool is, I hope it helps me do my job better. I hope it's not just a data entry tool. And if it's a data entry tool, I hope it's not constantly putting errors up in my face and I need to complete these 3 fields before I can move from stage 2 to stage 3. Or something else. I'm closing the case and now I have to spend whatever, lots of time and jump through extra hoops. So stakeholder, taking into account the stakeholders, and really the data in any CRM is going to be useless if nobody wants to use it.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to make sure people want to use it, give them something, a reason
Mm-hmm.
to use the system. And that's got to be designed in there. And then over time, there's got to be a compromise between process analytics and usability.
That's a great point. You highlight one aspect that stakeholder, if they were involved in the project, could bring out is, our current software isn't perfect, but what we do like about it is A or B. We
Right.
really do like this screen right here, or we really do like the ability to take our iPad and go walk and do this. And those can become adoption accelerators for
Mhm.
a future Salesforce solution that says, okay, we're replacing that software, but they did really like these 2 components. And so let's leverage our Lightning Web components, our flows, let's leverage our kind of modern tools to kind of really lift and shift that capability, at least that interface as you're talking about, so that it looks familiar to them and they recognize, hey, not only did we give you something good, it's going to require some change, but we did our best to really bring across some of those anchor points that you really did like and not lose those in the process.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think in discovery, I don't know if people always ask that question. I know you want change, but what do you want to keep?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the good part? Like, what's working? I mean, maybe that's asked by the best of us, but I know that we're so often assuming that change is part of this that we're looking at assuming that everything built will be good.
For
And
sure. Oh,
really,
and that there's a whole jettison, right? That like, oh, well,
yeah,
if some of this is bad, if it's bad enough to have us here, then the whole thing is probably worth
right.
throwing out. And I think that's a bad assumption for sure. And you can build a lot of goodwill on the people that will actually have to champion this future adoption by retaining some of those small adoption or those anchor points that we can retain in the new system,
Yeah.
even if it's just how it looks or how it works. Well, you had a story about a Siebel implementation that had some similar elements that we could learn from.
Yeah, the story it was about performance testing. So it was all about scope. So a large telephony mobile phone company was rolling out Siebel, and I was on an ancillary project also at the same company. So I heard about the project and I heard about how they made a deadline, which was to go live by Christmas because it was a big shopping season for mobile phone sales. But they hadn't performance tested the system with the 3,000 agents or whatever that were going to be on the call center during that system during that time. And so even though there was sign off from the customer and sign off from the partner, and then, okay, this is what we agreed to, and this is what happened. In the end, what happened was the CIO looked bad because they were unable to sell the phones or take the calls during the Christmas season because Siebel couldn't stay up long enough. I don't know how Siebel used to work. But the call center wasn't productive or as productive as they were expecting it to be. It wasn't performance tested. And so it's just a story that came up. You and I were talking about cutting scope to make a project work. And I mean, it's really hard. I mean, maybe you use examples like this. When you say to your customer wants to cut scope, you say, I know this has been done before. We seriously got a performance test because even if I deliver you a beautiful looking thing that meets all your requirements, that does not mean that we've actually completed the performance testing and we can guarantee under load that it's going to work right. These are when we do things like that, every project has, I forget, 5 factors: scope, quality, effort, resources, and
Time.
what is it? Time,
Time?
right? Is there an acronym for that?
I don't know. I've just heard
Okay.
levers.
SQRT, scope, resources, time, effort. SQRTE, I think is what it is. And you got to cut something. If time is going to be short, then something else has to get cut. And so I want to be people focused in my thought process here about what happens. We're trying to preserve the relationship with our customer and help our customer be the successful person they want to be, our consulting client. But at the same time, we got to look out for them for the things that they might be asking us to do. It's not in their best interest. And if we're going to convey a message like that, we need their trust. And we don't always have that. They may not, or they may not care, or maybe we have to propose alternatives like other things we should cut besides just, for example, performance testing or change management.
That's a good point. So let's transition here into kind of what's on coming down the pike or on the wire as it relates to kind of Salesforce career news or trends. We're in the fourth quarter right now. A lot of people thinking about starting new jobs in the new year or looking for new opportunities. Anything you've seen that's noteworthy?
Yeah, I mean, it is the time of year. It's probably every company in Q4. People start thinking about next year and what they want to do next year. And people inside and outside Salesforce, I mean, every company start thinking about like, well, let me get my resume ready. I mean, now is a great time of year for anybody looking for a job to start applying for jobs because most companies turn over their fiscal year January 1st. And now is when companies are finalizing their budgets, trying to hire, starting to open job recs so that, they can be
Yeah, and there's a lot
positioned
more
and ready to go.
optimism in the marketplace right now, which is good.
So I don't know, I see that happening.
Well, I think, one aspect I've been looking at is doing research into what people recommend as you think about people going out and, especially in the Salesforce world. I have a lot of friends who, they are putting together training elements for Salesforce, certification help, but there's been a lot of enablement, which is really cool. A lot of courses out there, a lot of programs, not just for vets, but for moms and all kinds of cool stuff. So I like looking at what are the recommendations that people put out there. And I think one surprising element is I don't actually see a lot of intangibles on any of these lists. I see people focusing on certifications, learning, maybe like tangential or ancillary elements. Like if you know Salesforce, maybe learning Agile, Scrum Master, product owner, maybe learning business process design, maybe learning a visual tool to, kind of demonstrate that, or, a great discovery tool like Elements Cloud or whatever it might be. I hear that a lot. I hear elements of, really working on your own technical chops, maybe admin people taking on a little development, thinking about code or elements, but I just don't see any aspects around the intangibles, which is so surprising to me. As if I thought about, two people taking an interview for the same position, and one of them saying like, I have all these amazing technical chops, but I really can't facilitate a meeting with multiple stakeholders. It's really difficult for me to hear signal from noise because I love going down these rabbit holes and these really interesting engineering topics. And, I have trouble kind of cutting things or abbreviating things to understand or to get to something that can be done rather than really trying to be a technical purist or something of, I want to get all of this done because that's what's most important.
Hmm.
Versus another person who says, I don't really have that much technical skill, but I can definitely get to what we should be doing. What are the constraints? What are the considerations and the risk? And gather whatever technical expertise I need around me to get it done. I mean, to
Hmm.
me, the choice is so obvious that the person with that intangible acumen would be so much more appealing to the role. It's so surprising to me that I don't see a lot more intangible topics on these lists of things to do to get hired, you know?
I think it's true. So I hang out, read, fall asleep to the subreddit where the Salesforce developer subreddit or the Salesforce
Hmm.
subreddit. And I read in there a lot of questions about people saying, what do I do? I have my certifications, but I still can't get a job. And I think you and I have talked about how certifications good place to start. When we hire people as technical architects, they have to become Salesforce certified, and we make them do multiple levels of certification, and that's the beginning. But then after that, we do peer certifications where they now pretend to be in role and they present to us first, and we trip them up on purpose because we know where all the landmines are about, hey, you're about to go through this discovery call about product X, and take a shot at it, and then we're going to ask the squirrely questions because we know what they are, and we want to get that experience into the hands of the new hire before they go out and they're customer facing. And it makes me think about, so when you talk about the different intangibles, what I'm trying to get to with the intangible, with the peer certs, is not just do you know technically how to do it, but the intangible of when you get fired a question you're uncomfortable with, how do you roll with it?
Hmm.
Or how do you turn it around to be a challenge maybe to the customer, which is uncomfortable unless you're confident?
Hmm.
And you talk about the two different types of people you just profiled there. When you're a first level intro, right out of college or first job in a career, it is those low level things. Do you know the setup menu? Like, you will be handed a task and nobody's asking you to analyze very much. You're a doer,
Hmm.
but you're not an architect, and you're not a relationship manager, and you're not a risk manager. And those things all come with experience. And so when you hire, if you are somebody who has those soft and tangible skills, you're positioning yourself for a higher level job.
Hmm.
You need people who are the doers, who have the certifications. The productivity comes from organizing those people and keeping them properly loaded up with work if you're a manager, and making sure that they're able to do the things they're able to do and they're meeting expectations. So I think if you're a consultant, the thing, yes, of course, when we were junior consultants at Accenture, we weren't really allowed to talk to customers very much. We were told to just stay at our desk, and most meetings were held by the managers and the senior consultants because we don't know the priority of what's important to say. We might go into too much detail
Hmm.
about what a problem is. Customer doesn't want to know which DBA, whatever function is not working right or whatever. It's the perspective you get after some jobs, after experience, where you can be more the captain of a ship and go like, this is our direction. I know the risk. I know what to happen when there's a wind or a swell from a certain direction. I know what to happen when the left side of the rowers on the boat is tired,
Hmm.
and the right side's still going and we're starting to go in circles. I'm stretching the analogy here. But when you're a consultant, you have to make the customer confident that you have it under control. And that does not come from being the technical expert. That
Hmm.
comes from being a good communicator, a great listener, thoughtful, validating their concerns, and confidence. You don't have all the answers, but you're okay not having all the answers. I think you were telling me that that's a motion that you're comfortable with. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, well, I mentioned that, like having mastery in mystery
Okay,
is
yeah, that's it.
something that is very important and an aspect of essentially you're expecting the unknown. So rather than trying to avoid the unknown, which is an early inclination for people who are afraid because they don't want
Right.
to talk about anything they don't know,
Yeah, right.
is learning to expect the unknown, that I'm going to go into corners of this conversation that I don't know because it's important for us to surface those items. And anything I need to, I will simply have kind of a list of basically pre-prepared kind of verbal transitions, elements that basically I can use even if I am nervous, that give the client confidence that it's okay. We expected to be here. This was totally fine. And we'll go ahead and take note on that and we'll follow up with it and we'll find out what impact it's going to have. But
Yeah.
that's exactly what we were looking for in this conversation.
I think that's good. I mean, it took me a while. I tell everybody that works with me, I don't need you to know all the answers. Eventually, I need you to know the answers you didn't know the answers to initially. So it takes you 6 to 9 months in my position to get to a point where you know a lot of the answers because you've seen them before. But
Mhm.
initially, please say, I don't know the answer to that. Let me take that away and get back to you and just get back to somebody within 24 hours.
Mhm.
And then you'll learn and they'll be satisfied with your reply. And I've had salespeople come back to me who were surprised that I actually did follow up and then CC'd the salesperson. And salespeople love to get CC'd because it's another reason for them to follow up with a customer. So it opens a door for them again. So
Mhm.
and the customer's happy, but you gotta say, I don't know. Let me take a note. I've heard about this before, but I don't want to speculate, and then go figure out the answer
Mhm.
and then come back.
No, it's a good point. And it's also an aspect of that answer is going to be different based on the type of users. You're going to have vantage point on those answers. So you're going to be able to answer the technical question maybe to their engineering lead, and then you have to answer the kind of revenue based or impact question maybe to their CFO or their financial lead, and then you're going to have to maybe have a functional answer to maybe their head of training or the user experience lead. And so even that same answer has to take on different dimensions based on the perspective, right? The vantage point of the person looking at the problem.
Totally. You have to adjust your content and the level of detail to who your audience is. And I don't know if that summarizes what you're saying, but it's think about who's in your life and your family. You and I will talk about, oh my God, I had this hairy issue. And we can go on about single sign on and communities and some certificate and whatever, because we both are nerds
Mhm.
behind our, business experience. But if my wife says, "What'd you and John talk about?" I'm going to say, "No, I mean, technical stuff about Salesforce." We have to summarize it because
Sure.
we
We
know
just talked
that
about computers.
we talked about computers. No offense to my wife. I mean, she's on a computer all day, but
Sure.
certain people's eyes are going to roll back in their head about 30 seconds into your discussion
Mhm.
because you're losing their attention. You're drowning them in detail that they don't need.
And that's okay. It's not, and it's nothing, it's not a any kind of casting shade against them or anything like that. We all like to listen
Totally.
to WeFM, right? What's in it for me radio.
Totally.
And at different stages in our life, like we have different songs we want to be listening to. And I think that's, to kind of punctuate this, that's really the aspect of the intangible strengths that really help
Yeah.
you, as you mentioned, that help you to rise and lift yourself into that next recognition opportunity, that next hire, that next, promotion, whatever it might be. Those are the aspects that we like to focus on. And I think these are great examples. So good. Let's talk a little bit about what we're excited about. Now,
Yeah.
on my side, I shared with you as I was doing this research on technical project failures, I
Hmm.
found a new tool called Notebook LM that's from Google, which I had not seen before. And going back to the point about AI, so this is essentially the ability to take research. So I gathered a bunch of research from all sorts of different places. So I gathered case studies that were in PDF format. I gathered lots of McKinsey articles on their website. I gathered lots of news pieces from, CIO.com and all these other websites, and I'm able to add them into this library. And what it does is it kind of creates this small mini learning model related to all this data. So for example, I don't have to necessarily read every word of every single one of them. I can put them all into this, and then it gives me a chat interface that I can then ask questions. So
Hmm.
I have now about 22, 23 different sources. And so I asked it today, how many companies are mentioned in all these sources? And so it says, thinking, 32. And here they all are. Right. And by all their industries, like here are the customer ones and here were the related
Hmm.
ones, like these are the consultants. And it was incredible. And I asked questions on even the Foxmeyer drug example, and I
Hmm.
highlighted, what were the top three failures? And it just spits out, communications, change management, and, kind of lack of scope control. Now, they weren't necessarily rated or ranked, and it mentioned that they're not ranked, but here in the order that they were told, inside the articles. So I thought that was a really neat tool, and what I like about it is it's still there. That's not going anywhere, and every time I find more
Hmm.
detail around another project failure example, I'm just going to add it to my learning model, And when I have a new question I want to ask of it, all I have to do is just go and I have a chat interface and I can ask it. So I can continually glean from this and enrich it over time. And finally, it also creates a two-person AI generated podcast as a summary of the information, which I
No
thought was really
way.
fascinating. So I'll provide that up as an example for listeners because I found it to be fascinating.
I'd forgotten that podcast thing, and now I remember you playing it for me. It's got two dynamic voices, a man and a woman, and they're basically explaining the content of your notebook with pauses and voice
Yeah, with
inflections that are
jokes and
interesting,
idioms, it's
jokes.
amazing.
It's really impressive. I'd forgotten about that, and it makes me think, so you get to it by going to notebooklm.google.com. It signs you in with your Google account. You can create a notebook. I heard about it, so you and I, we try new things, kind of early adopter people. I saw today I was on a call with she's a project manager, program manager for my division, and she's like organizing so much data. And she brought up the fact that she uses Notebook LM. And I was like, what? That's fantastic. So yeah, that is a really, really cool find. And it's cool that you share it out.
Yeah, and I look forward to, thinking about more uses. I think I'm getting into a little bit of like the open source science world, like the thunderstorm generator and some other ways to kind of attack, carbon emissions and things like that are
Yeah.
much more accessible. And so the idea of just gathering all this information and just dropping it into one of my notebooks so that I can continually enrich that and then having that available to ask questions. I mean, it's a totally different way of learning. It's like going to the library instead of going to the card catalog and going to the one book.
Uh-huh.
It's like going to an aggregator and saying, okay, find me every book in the library on this topic, and now give me a chat interface that I can ask a question of all those books. There's
Yeah.
a fascinating kind of personification of the data
Yeah.
that kind of comes out of this, which I think is really fascinating.
I think it's super cool. It's a great find.
So our next segment here is something that inspires you.
Oh, so many things. When the I think the thing I keep coming back to is imposter syndrome and the ability to overcome imposter syndrome. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know I had it. Most people have it. And then I overcame it, and I had already overcome it by the time somebody explained it to me. And the concept is, somebody asks you, to speak on a topic, or you're in a meeting with a customer and they say, Eric, what do you think about this? And you're like, who am I? I've been here for 2 years at Salesforce or however many. I'm not sure I'm the person you should be asking for my opinion, because who am I? And we had a guy who came from, I'm going to say, not the traditional, educational background or lifestyle, growing up with sort of a broken family. And now he is one of our distinguished technical architects in our security practice on the sales team. And he is truly, I mean, not the opposite of imposter. He is like a validated, expert. But he had imposter syndrome, and there's a way to overcome it where you have to realize that your experiences and what you know is valid. And when you're talking to a room of four other people, well, you know what you know, and they know what they know, but they don't know what you know. And also, if you've had different experiences, everybody's had different experiences. So there is not a lot of a reason for you to feel shy or ashamed of where you're coming from. Somebody put you in this position, hopefully you're a manager, thinking you could be successful, or, whatever the situation is. And go ahead, ask those questions, give your opinions. If they don't like them, they'll let you know, and you'll learn something. That's part of the job. And it doesn't always feel good, but it's okay. So getting over imposter syndrome and realizing it's a thing, once you can name it, especially with this one, now there's tons of books on Amazon on meeting imposter syndrome, overcoming imposter syndrome. And once you diagnose it, it's almost like half the problem goes away, for me, at least.
It's a great point. I mean, a well-described problem is half solved, right? Is an
Yeah,
axiom that
right.
I've heard before. And I love that we all deal with that sense of being being an imposter, being ill-equipped for that
Yeah.
particular ask. And I've come to find that, the question I ask myself is, who would be better, right? Like if I'm not the right person in my own eyes right now, who do I know of that would be better at this particular situation? Doesn't mean I have to be perfect or know it all, but the question is, who would be better? And if I can't clearly find who would be better, then I I'm the offer of compromise. Then I guess I'm supposed to be here, right? And
Yeah.
that was always helpful for me. And I think one who is, to me, the one who is supposed to be in that position, like, when you were called earlier, and you didn't feel like you were to be there, it's not the one who knows all the information. To me, in my opinion, it's the one who, this is my cat Willow wanting to join our conversation. It's the one who's committed to bringing the right information, right? The
Yeah.
one who's open and honest about nobody's going to know everything. And in fact, the one who recognizes that and can freely admit it is actually the one who should be in that role, not the one who is claiming to be a know-it-all, but the one who is committed to being a learn-it-all and making sure to push the conversation forward. And
Yeah, it's true. I think where I really was probably initially truly feeling like I was an imposter was security conversations with my customers. And, oh, well, just do this. And do you do this? And I started taking those calls basically saying, I am your first level of contact for these questions. I know a lot of the answers. I don't know all the answers. So let's go through our presentation today. And our perspective at Salesforce is if I don't know the answer, I'm going to escalate this to somebody else. And if we need to, I'll put you in touch with somebody else. But let's go through what our discussion is today because I went in knowing eventually after my first one or two calls, it doesn't have to be only me. There's like a whole bunch of people who know more than me, and I'm just the communicator right now or the accountable person that's put in touch with a customer
yeah,
to instill
you're the
confidence
point
or
of
answer
contact.
questions. I'm the point of contact.
Yes.
And let's see how far we can get. And maybe I'll turn you over to somebody else or introduce you to somebody else, but nobody's expecting me to have all the answers.
Well, I think that you have certainly a track record of being curious and one who's always willing to learn from anybody, no matter what their role is. And that is the kind of person that is a great point of contact because they will find it out, not just because they want to solve the customer's problem, but they also have that innate sense of curiosity and
Yeah,
appetite for learning that motivates and drives them to look in areas that other people might not look. One
right.
thing I remember from how people remarked about Albert Einstein is that he did a lot of daydreaming and was very curious, and he was able to connect what many people thought were divergent subject matters.
Mm,
He would connect aspects of the physical sciences to elements that he was looking at in space, and these were just not things that people considered to be at all in the same domain, but he was willing to connect them and come up with amazing conclusions and insights because of his willingness to kind of, look in new areas and, buck the status quo or the expectation a little bit because of his own curiosity and appetite. So good.
yeah.
So everyone deals with imposter syndrome. There's some good suggestions on how to get out of it. And certainly, I think emphasizing the intangibles there, even if you are learning on the technology side, can be a really, really good way to grow confidence because simply recognizing and articulating the problem in a more clear capacity
hmm
essentially gets you halfway towards the solution.
Yeah, it totally does.
Great. Now, I am curious on this topic. When was it that you realized that you weren't an imposter anymore? Was there like a specific moment or, did one of your managers kind of tell you or did other people start to give you feedback? Like what was that point where you recognized that?
I want to say you can have imposter syndrome in one topic area and not in others, probably.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe what the tool that I have now that I didn't have early on is just the realization that I can't have all the answers, and that is a relief. When I realized it, I think I got to a point. Well, I mean, for me, it was experience and knowledge. I just had been on enough meetings, calls, phone calls where I wasn't so stumped anymore. And then I was willing to be in positions where I really didn't know was about to happen. And so, 10 years into my job, I went through multiple changes, different industry changes as a sales engineer and then technical architect and more complex problems and more intimidating situations where, Eric, I need you to call the CIO and have a meeting with him because we need to understand the overall architecture and you need to talk to them about how this rollout's going to go and what's missing in their own staffing to make this project successful. And I'm like, I haven't met the CIO yet. And they're like, I know. Here's his name. And how do I introduce myself and then set the scope of what we're trying to do? I'm just a junior guy. I mean, I was 10 years into my job, but compared to a CIO who's been doing this for 20, 25 years, you know, he was nice to me. He was kind and patient with my silly questions at times, or lack of perspective, but it all went great. So the more those things happened, the more I had confidence that, you can bring me anything and I'll help you to the best of my abilities. And if I don't know the question, I have to go research it. And I guess that's where I go with being stumped.
Yeah, it's good. I was thinking I feel like my imposter syndrome was more because I'm one who loves to be in a wide variety of situations. So I actually never found it appealing to kind of really get good at like one, kind of swim lane or one situation.
Yeah.
However, I did find that who I was representing myself as in some of those situations, I'd find myself in uncomfortable situations, like not exactly knowing what to do, and I certainly made it more difficult for myself by putting myself in so many different
So
situations.
you were putting stretch goals in front of yourself and you were unprepared sometimes. Is that
I
what
was
you're
definitely
saying?
unprepared sometimes. And so I think for me, what I realized, and I think this is one aspect that might be kind of our second question of, how did you overcome a situation where you felt like an imposter that some people might find valuable is, I took in part of my growth, I wanted to, kind of understand more of team dynamics and how to create structures that maybe drive excellence in an organization. So I took a course from a company called MAP, and they write a book called Vital Factors, which basically creates this execution-oriented model, much of what we look for CRM to do in a sense, right? Where the system becomes the kind of barometer and the police and et cetera. So inside this, it's a 2.5 day workshop, and at the end of it, they have this essentially there's like a scenario, right? They set up like a faux kind of scenario where there's a CEO there, and you are in the position with your team, you and the three other people. You basically have to come up with a pitch deck to get this person to buy your company. And he's going to choose one of the four teams to buy your company, right? And you need to convince them. And all they give you is a flip chart and some pin. Okay, seems simple enough. So we went back and we all did our planning. So it's my team, the three of them and I. And everybody had various ways of telling the story. And I waited and I just kind of went through, and my idea was very different than anything I was hearing or anything I was seeing on any of the other teams. Right? And it came down to something very simple. I was like, listen, right, if we're going to tell a story, we have 5 minutes to make our case. We don't need words on our pages. We need pictures. And I know it's going to look elementary to you, but the picture is going to give you the clue on what to say, because nobody's going to read anything we say. And if they do read what's on the page, they're not going to be listening to us anymore. So we lose it because we need them to be listening to us. And ultimately, I had disagreements and whatever. And they finally said, well, fine. If you're going to do that, then you have to lead. And I was like, oh, okay. And these people they've been in their career 15 years more than me. I was fairly young in this. And so I took a risk and I said, okay. Right. And I went in and I drew the pictures on the slides and I gave everybody their particular roles and I led the presentation and we ended up winning. And our team was the only team that used pictures and like did our model. And now what it showed me is not just that, obviously pictures speak louder than words and all of that, but it also highlighted for me that there are ways to, be open to leadership unexpectedly. That there's an aspect of, being confident even in what you don't know, but there are elements of it that we do know. And I can just stand more firmly in those elements I do know. And the third aspect is really putting yourself in a position as a top performer. You want to be in a position where there is an objective that you can be recognized to say, hey, that was successful. You won. And putting yourselves in that position, whether I won or not in that instance, it would have been a win for me because I would have gotten the feedback and the insight as to what I did well, what I didn't do well, and all of that. So for me, that was a big kind of inflection point, was just highlighting that I can be in these situations with people that are much more mature than me. And if I just handle myself calmly with composure and I ask the right questions, I motivate people in sometimes indirect ways, right? Calmly, and ultimately then put it out there and take the risk and be vulnerable, that really good things can happen. And so that's
Yeah.
really what I look forward to in these difficult situations now, is not the risk of failing, but the feeling of succeeding, even in a small way, and getting that momentum. It can be addicting, right? And
Yeah.
it
You don't get
it's
the
a
feeling of
payoff
success without a little bit of tension beforehand.
for sure.
Like that. if you're like, if there's a food analogy, if you get sugar every day, sugar's not going to be special. But if you're on vegetables every day and you know sugar's coming, like that sugar is going to be so much more valuable. And so same thing with, success or treats or career progress or whatever. If we're used to getting promoted every year, oh, you got a promotion again. I mean, great, but like I didn't have to fight for it. And it's the struggle that makes great. I feel like I'm repeating something that's probably been written before, but like if you don't struggle, like what have you learned? And if you don't, and I believe also that our habits and our life lessons, good and bad, but they come from an emotional response that we had. And it sears in the memory of something. If you don't have an emotional response to something, I don't believe you're going to remember it. And in your case, you had the struggle. There was pressure from these 3 or 4 other people. There was your own self-doubt. There was maybe a little bit of reward coming from the reactions of these people as they liked your ideas, or maybe you had one champion among your teammates who was like, no, I like this idea. Let's listen to him. And like those little things kept you going. And you did come with a certain amount of preparedness and, skill where you were a good listener and collaborative, and those foundations were already there for you to prepare you for this point. But it's pretty cool that you got that success in a scary time, and then that formed your taste for, ooh, let's see if I can do this again.
Yeah, I love it. So that is a great transition for our listeners, we would love to hear your overcoming imposter syndrome story. Where did you realize that it was no longer an issue? Or we're curious if there was a situation or a particular tool or something that you can share that we would love to highlight here on a show. And so we have various ways, which we'll put in the notes down below. You can reply on our socials. We actually have a voicemail at 540-TRIAL-75. We would love to hear your voice and potentially feature you on a future episode. This show is sponsored by the People First Method, where they are coaching intangible excellence for Salesforce professionals and helping to reduce technical project failure in the Salesforce ecosystem. And we appreciate you listening and looking forward to another episode every 2 weeks. Have a great day, Eric.
All right. I'll see you later.